Hi, I'm Nelson Ford from the Gunsmith, Phoenix, Arizona, and I told you we'd start off with the 1911's after we did the pre-1911's. I've got a great selection here. I've got to tell you, I had one guy drive down from to bring this gun to me. It is a Remington UMC. They were made for the U.S. military. 1918, 1919. They made 21,000. That might sound like a lot, but Colt made 650,000 for the same war. And so these are really the rarest of the World War I's. I called him. I remembered that he had checked one in, and I told him that was a special gun, and we can't change the outside appearance, but I wanted to put fresh springs in it, so because he wanted to keep shooting it, and it's his gun. I wanted the gun to be able to protect itself. Now, Rockwell's a little low on these things. I'm not sure, 32, something like that. And I didn't want the slide beating up the saddle in here. And so I put in a fresh 16-pound slide spring and told him not to use any modern fighting ammunition, super duper hollow points, whatever. Just use range ball ammunition. It's what the gun was intended for. We also changed the firing pin spring because you should know that on these early guns there's no firing pin block, and when that slide comes down, that firing pin's just free in there to move, and when it hits and stops, that firing pin's going to want to move a little bit, and it does every time you drop the slide. And I've had people come to me and say, hey, when I jack a live round back out when I get home and clear my gun, there's a little dimple on the primer. What's that from? I said, you need a new firing pin spring, because as those springs get weaker, they allow that firing pin to travel further forward, and they start making a little dimple on the firing pin, or on the primer. But at any rate, he said, I'm coming down for some reason or another. I'll bring it to you. You have it, put it in one of your videos, and I'll come and get it from you later. And I just thought he was so wonderful. It's got the a proper magazine with the lanyard loop. It's a half-dip mag or hardened mag. But we'll get to her in a little bit because we're going to start right with the 1911. And I've got a 1913 here. Another friend brought this to me. Very early gun. But it displays all the original characteristics. It has the half-dip magazine. The complaints that the 1911 got that brought him to the 1924 or the 1911A1, which most people know today. They don't know the differences on a lot of the older ones. I'll get a pointer here. That's a big marker. Here's a pointer. The original 1911s, this is a commercial one. You can tell there's a C, high polish finish. They have a coarser finish. There's a military 1914 here, and it says NO, and then the serial number. And those are military contract guns. The ones that start with a C are commercial. This is a 4-digit commercial gun, 1913. But some of the complaints were the long trigger was typical 1911s, true 1911s. There's no cutaway for your finger right here behind the guard. And if you look at a later, this is a 1924 later, you can see the cutaway, the back of the guard right here for your finger. So we have a long trigger, the cutaway near the trigger. The flat mainspring housing, they changed that to an arch as well in 1924 to allow for the gun in the hand to come up a little bit higher. People were shooting low with them. Thin front sight. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a fifth, and it will come to me. Wide blades, trigger, mainspring housing. Another fun thing to note about these guns is the early Colts. I think there was 1.3 inch between the diamonds, the diamonds around the screw and the grip, and Colt had 14 to 16 diamonds in the checkering between them. The Remington Rand had 15 on all of them, and the Springfield only had an inch in there. And so I think theirs were 13 or 14. I wish I had looked that up because they might be 10. But there are aficionados that, if you go into John Poyer's book, it's an amazing book. It'll detail all this, the little stuff. In fact, this gun being so early, it has one characteristic that none of the other guns that here or that I've seen has. The first of the magazine release catches, you would push from the far side, and you'd grab a hold of it, pull out, and turn, and your switch would come out. And it just had a dimple that you would push in. It didn't have the little screw, as we know, not a threaded screw, but like a tail light bulb, you push in and turn. A lot of people have taken the magazine catches out, you'll know what I mean. But they had a dimple originally, like the 1913 dimple. They put this one in. I'm going to get ahead of myself, because people assembling the guns on the line would slip off and scratch a brand new commercial gun, have to go back in the bluing. So they put that little dimple in. That's the last pin you put in when you put your lower together. But they had a dimple over here as well. And like Colt, not wanting to waste things, when they went to the screw, push and turn the screw head, they didn't want to waste all the dimple ones they had on the line. So they took a cutter and they cut a screw head into the dimple. And this one is a 1913 C34XX. And so all the way up until C6400, I think, between 3100 and 6400, they used up these. They took the dimples and cut a screw slot in them. So if you look at this one closely, you'll see it's a dimple with the screw slot cut into it. And so that's an interesting permutation on this gun. But this is a commercial 1913, very early Colt. So then we step up to the 1914. This is the military. This gun saw a lot of use. You can tell it's a military gun. What's interesting to know that the Colt was only selling 20 or 30,000 a year to the U.S. government, and until we started getting close to the war, 17, 18, 19, 1918 and 1919. God, in 1919, I think Colt sold them 300,000 pistols, making a total of 650 for World War I. And so there were a whole lot of these pistols around for a long time, because when you went from after the war, 1920, all the way to 1940, they bought 80,000 guns, the remainder, the next 20 years. And so World War I really exacerbated Colt on their production and got those guys really rolling. It's what we should know. Now we know how many Colts. I didn't mention Springfield Armory. I couldn't get one for today's display. Springfield made 31,000, which isn't that many, but it was more than the Remington UMC. Remington UMC was 21,000. And so it's just a wonderful day in my life to have one in my hands. But we get a good shot of this later. So after the war, the gun changed. You know, when we got to 1924, we got to the A1. So it's no longer the 1911, you know, without the cutaway here. It's got the long trigger. It's got the flat mainspring housing, the little sights with the wide hammer spur. Oh, the other thing, it was the grip safety. And here's a good example. This is a 1927 Argentinian. And it was interesting how they got their, bought the patent from Colt. Colt wouldn't sell them a patent. And they had a great rule in that country at that time that any guns the military used, it had to use guns manufactured in their own country. We should do that here. But at any rate, this is a 1927, so it's after 24, has the arched mainspring housing, the bigger sights, a smaller spurred hammer, the short trigger, and the cutaway for your fingers to reach in there. At any rate, they also went to a larger tail to protect people's hands from being pinched. And that was actually in the orders from the military. And if you look at this, post-1924, you can see how much longer the grip safety is. And it was supposed to give you more protection. We finally, in 1975, started using Jimmy Clark grip safeties and Commander hammers, and that gave you full protection. But at any rate, so the Argentinians had to buy, Colt said, you buy 10,000 units and we'll sell you the patent so you can make them yourself. And they said, fine, where do we sign? And they bought 10,000 units and they started making their own. And this one is actually not used by the military. It says right on it, Policia Federal. So it's a federal police gun, which even makes it crazier. But at any rate, this is the 1927, so it exhibits features of the 1924. Now we don't have to go far, 2 more years. Gosh, I can't believe I passed up the 1919. This is a genuine Colt used in World War I, a model of 1919. It has the cables on it to hook it to your horse. So if you're riding and you drop your magazine, you don't have to chase it or put it in your pocket. It'll be dangling off the back of your horse, and you can reload it in your own time and put it back in your scabbard. And that went as well for your gun. You could take your gun and strap it as well, and that's why they had the lanyard loop for the cavalry, so they wouldn't lose the guns or magazines. But this gun's got an amazing history. It's stamped AA, which means it went back to Augusta Arsenal for a rework, and then was reissued for World War II. And so she sure got her ride, her military ride. So got that one done. So we just left 1927, and the next thing to happen with the 1911, there's a lot of dispute, is a more powerful cartridge. I said it. The 38 Super came out in 1929. This is a 1930 with a proper magazine, half-dip magazine. And these things actually outsold the 45 commercially, not from the military, but commercially, all the way up to 1970. I think they made 200,000 of these things. But you get to the Depression era, and you had, by that time, illegal manufactures of booze, and you had quite a thing going on in Chicago and New York with whiskey drummers and prohibition, and these guys were now running around in Ford motor cars, and they were being protected by the glass and door panels, which they had glass in them by 1929. And they took the 38 auto cartridge. Unfortunately, they didn't make it longer. They didn't do something to make it distinguish it. So when these super cartridges came out, they were getting in all sorts of the 02 and 03. We covered the twin link guns in the last video, because they would fit and they were hurting the guns. They didn't blow them up, but they stretched the links and they hurt parts, and they weren't good for the guns. So they discontinued the 02 twin link and the 03 pocket hammer twin link in 1929 when this came out, and they tried to make it clear these are super speed, high speed. But at any rate, these are really the first Magnum. I guess the 3220 might be the first Magnum. But these were the first Magnums, certainly in an automatic, and certainly that were readily available. And they were driving them at 1,400 plus 1,450 feet per second. They were developing 470 foot-pounds of energy. And the 45, and there's a good argument for you, I'm not going to get in the middle of it, she only put out 370 foot-pounds of energy. And those door panels and those car windows and those early bulletproof vests that weren't all that great, this gun, the Super, had no problem with. And if you watch, I was so excited to see it. If you watch Public Enemies, a guy named Babyface Nelson at a point in the movie at night in a car was approached by a G-man, and they had select fire Supers, 21 round magazines. They put a Thompson machine gun forend grip up front with the finger grooves and some kind of a muzzle device on them, and they were select fire. No shoulder stock, just a pistol. And so these things really made a mark. It's almost an obscure caliber today. There's permutations of the Super. There's probably 4, 5, or 6 of them. And I learned because a great friend of mine who sells brass sold me 1,000 rounds of Super to load. And in amongst that Super, I pulled out about 6 or 7 or 8 different permutations of the case or cartridge that didn't want to go through my Dillon dies or load correctly. And so the Super has been fully used, and there's so much to say. A buddy of mine, Chuck, that I trust as far as design on the 1911's go, I trust him more than anybody to understand the design. And he just makes it clear, you know, if you're going to have a 1911 in a 36 cal, you should have it 9 mil, or you should have it 38 Super, not 9 mil, because the 9 mil doesn't take up the space properly during ejection, and you have to have a special ejector, and it's longer, so it's more flimsy. And the 38 Super takes up the magazine proper. And in fact, if you looked at a 9mm Colt, the Super, it's got the pleat in it, but it doesn't have the pad across the back. On the 9mm, there's a plate that they put in here, and they put 3 crunch dimples in there. And not everyone does it. Colt does it, higher quality manufacturers do. But the Super is the proper cartridge for this gun because the length is the same as the 45 or close to, and it works well in this device. And so that's the Super. And she came out in 29. This is a 30. And then shortly thereafter, a training gun was made. It's one of the few automatics, commercial type automatics that were made during World War II. It's called the Colt Ace. It has a floating cartridge or floating chamber in it, and that lead builds up between the front of the floating chamber, and the carbon gets in there. And after 100 or 200 rounds, some could go 300 rounds, some couldn't go 100. But that floating chamber didn't like operating in the guns. They were a permutation of 22, and they were wonderful. There is something that's really cool about these guns. I'm going to grab the 1914 because she's in the worst shape of all these girls. What a great bunch of guns. We're going to clear it. And I did this in my first video, but I didn't like my first video. We're going to pull it sooner or later. So we're clear. This is a spent round. They're all over the ground after you shoot. If you take your gun apart, I can't tell you how many people. I've had wonderful guys come into my store, experienced, beautiful guys, wonderful people, but they were over their gun and working on it, and they turned the bushing, and the cap came up and hit them across the cheek and across their forehead. So when they came in my store to pick up the recoil spring cap, they had this injury on them from it. This is a 45 round. It's the same diameter. Tell me this is a mistake. It'll go right on here. It'll go into the gun. It's harder to initiate because it's not as long. It doesn't capture as much as the spring. And it's a little harder to get in there for me. Anyway, it's trapping it. Now I can use this gun as is for as many rounds until the bushing turns and this comes out. But if you wanted it to be permanent, all you would have to do is take this, because it works fine. All you would have to do is take this round and go into your garage where your bench grinder is and grind off a little bit of that rim, that extractor groove, the rim, and now it'll interface properly with the bushing. And now you have a cap at your house, and you're gonna work just fine, and you don't have to wait to eBay to send you one, or go down to the store and order one. you have one right here, and it'll work until you need it. So I thought there was more manufacturers for World War One at first, because I remember I explored World War II first a long time ago, and there was Ithaca and Remington Rand and Union Switch and Signal, and then Singer Sewing Machine made 100 or 500, and some Canadian joint made 100 of them, and I think Winchester made 100 of them. But of course, Colt was the winner. They pulled through the contract for the United States government. So that's what I know about the 1911, the winner of the government contract with 6,000 rounds without a failure, and the different permutations going up to World War II. And I hope to do World War II next. We're just going to have to see how many guys I can get to bring me guns. But I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and send me your comments and your questions, and I'll try to answer them as best I can.